Team 7 approached Team 3 camp in the darkness following. Jin, impossibly quiet movement through terrain that should have made stealth impossible. The loose gravel and scattered rocks that covered Cathara's surface would normally announce any approaching creature long before they reached their destination, but Jin, feet found secure footing with each step, as if he had walked this path many times before. Night prowlers were magnificent specimens of evolutionary perfection. Each creature stood nearly 3 meters tall with muscular bodies. Designed for explosive speed and endurance, their crystalline claws gleamed in the pale moonlight, sharp enough to cut through academy armor like thin fabric. Their pack coordination was flawless. As they circled the terrified students who huddled behind failing the defenses with intelligent patience, tapping at weak points and coordinating their movements like experienced military units, their eyes reflected an alien intelligence that understood exactly how to break through the failing protection and signaled for his teammates to remain hidden behind a cluster of large rocks, then stepped into the clearing alone. His movement was fluid and confident, without any of the hesitation that should mark someone facing creatures that had killed trained soldiers. The night prowlers immediately detected his presence and turned toward this new potential prey. For a long moment, predator and human regarded each other in the pale moonlight. The largest night prowler tilted its head, studying this strange creature that showed no fear. The pack hunters had evolved to read the body language of prey species, looking for signs of weakness, panic, or flight preparation. But Jin's stance confused their instincts. What happened next defied everything the galaxy believed about natural law and predator relationships. Did not run or call for help, or even draw a weapon. Rocky landscape. The sound was unlike anything his hidden teammates had ever heard from their quiet companion. It contained harmonics that seemed to vibrate in their bones and activate primitive fear responses. They did not know they possessed. The night prowlers froze their pack instincts, suddenly confused by signals they did not recognize, but their DNA remembered from evolutionary nightmares buried in genetic memory. Strange encounter. Jin stepped forward, and the sound in his throat deepened, becoming something that made Team 7 members cover their ears, despite their distance from the confrontation, breaking down as individual survival instincts overrode their group hunting behavior. The largest night prowler decided to end this strange standoff with a direct attack. It charged with speed that would overwhelm any normal creature, moving like liquid lightning toward Jin's position, its claws extended for a killing strike that should have ended the confrontation. Crack through the air that his hidden teammates felt in their bones, rather than heard with their ears. The apex predator collapsed. Instantly, its spine severed with surgical precision that spoke of perfect knowledge of alien anatomy. The remaining night prowlers attacked simultaneously in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm any single opponent. They came from different angles, using pack tactics refined through millions of years of evolutionary development. No creature should have been able to survive their combined assault. Jin moved through their formation like liquid death, each motion perfectly calculated to use their own momentum against them. His hands became weapons more deadly than any manufactured blade, finding pressure points and vital organs with instinctive accuracy that suggested evolutionary adaptation rather than lured technique. He caught the second night prowler throat as it leaped toward him, crushing its windpipe with grip strength that exceeded theoretical limits for his apparent body mass. The third creature received a strike to its chest that stopped its heart immediately. The fourth attempted to rake him with its claws, but found only empty air as Jin flowed around the attack and delivered a blow that shattered its skull. The fifth night prowler tried to retreat, having recognized that it faced something far more dangerous than normal prey. Flight seemed slow by comparison. A single strike to its spine ended the hunt. The entire fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, 5 apex predators lay dead in the moonlight, arranged in a rough line. Where they had fallen, Jin stood unmarked among them, breathing easily as if he had just finished a light exercise routine. What they had witnessed, their understanding of biological limitations, had just been shattered by something that should have been impossible, according to every scientific principle. They had learned. Team 7 watched from their hiding spots with growing horror as they realized what they had been sharing quarters with for months. Su's psychic abilities finally penetrated Jin. Mental shields. Now that he was no longer actively concealing himself, the visions she received sent her into unconsciousness. As her mind tried to process thoughts and memories that belonged to something far more alien than his appearance, suggested. What are you, Tay? Whispered his warrior training, screaming. His armor plating had automatically shifted into defensive configuration as his body recognized the presence of something that registered as a superior. Predator Jin turned toward his teammates, and for the first time since they had known him, his expression was completely honest. There was something ancient and patient in his brown eyes, something that had been watching and learning and waiting for the right. Terrified faces. I am exactly what Professor Cale Thomas described in his lecture, he said quietly. I am a persistence hunter from Deathworld Prime. And the distant howl of other night prowlers who had caught the scent of death and were fleeing deeper into the moon. Cave systems, their instincts told them that something far more dangerous than they had ever encountered now hunted in their territory. Hannah, mechanical voice, stuttered as her translation circuits struggled with concepts her people had no words for. But the Galactic Council said all Deathworld creatures were quarantined, she managed to say. You should not exist outside that city. Began walking back toward their camp, stepping carefully around his teammates, as if they were fragile things that might break if he moved too suddenly. That had spent its entire evolutionary history as an apex predator, the Galactic Council believed many things that were not entirely accurate, he replied. His voice carried the same gentle tone, but now his teammates could hear the controlled power. Beneath it, they assumed that because we were dangerous, we could not also be intelligent enough to find our own way to the stars. Yoon surfaced from his portable water tank, bubbles streaming rapidly from his breathing apparatus in distress. How long have your people been among us? He asked. Long enough, Jin answered, and something in his tone suggested that this revelation was only the beginning of secrets that would reshape everything the galaxy believed about itself and the creatures they thought they had successfully contained on a distant, impossible world. As they returned to Camp, Tay noticed that Jin movements had changed subtly. Student behavior. This was how an apex predator moved when it no longer needed to pretend to be prey. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Galactic Military Academy as hundreds of young cadets hurried through the corridors. Each student looked different from the next. Some had blue skin and 6 eyes, while others had tentacles instead of arms. A few walked on 4 legs, while some floated above the ground using natural gas sacs in their bodies. The diversity was amazing, but they all shared one thing in common. They were here to learn about the dangerous creatures that lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy. Jin walked quietly among them, his appearance unremarkable compared to his alien classmates. He had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a face that seemed almost boring next to the exotic features surrounding him. His skin was a plain tan color, without scales or chitin. His eyes were brown and ordinary-looking. He carried his books in a simple bag and wore the standard academy uniform that somehow looked different on his human frame, though none of his classmates could say exactly why. The great lecture hall could hold over 1,000 students, and today it was packed full. The ceiling stretched high above them, covered with holographic displays that showed star maps and creature classifications. Professor Cale Thomas stood at the front of the room, his tall blue form commanding attention from every student present. His 6 eyes moved constantly, scanning the crowd, while his 4 arms gestured at the massive displays behind him. Today, we study the most dangerous predators known to our civilization. The professor announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast space without need for amplification. The holographic display shifted, showing a creature that made several students gasp in fear. It had razor-sharp claws longer than most beings' arms, multiple heads turned in different directions, and its body was covered in armor-like scales that seemed to absorb light. These are the Shadow Stalkers of Grim 7, the professor continued. They can hunt in complete darkness, using senses that we barely understand. They track their prey across continents and never give up once they have chosen a target. The hologram showed the creature moving with fluid grace. Despite its massive size, its claws left deep grooves in solid rock as it demonstrated its hunting techniques. A student from the crystalline Nephora system raised 3 tentacles to ask a question. Professor, how do they track prey across such distances without losing the scent? Question. Cadet Zeph Lin, the professor, replied, the Shadow Stalkers have what researchers call persistence hunting. They do not need to catch their prey immediately. Instead, they follow at a steady pace for days or weeks until their target becomes exhausted and can no longer run. This hunting method is almost impossible to escape because the predator never stops, never sleeps, and never loses interest. Jin shifted slightly in his seat at the back of the lecture hall, but his expression remained neutral. Around him, other students whispered nervously to each other in their native languages. The idea of being hunted by something that never gave up clearly disturbed many of them, but the shadow stalkers are not the most feared creatures in our galaxy, the professor continued. The hologram changed again, showing a serpent-like being that seemed to be swimming through empty space. Its body was longer than most ships and covered in what looked like natural armor plating. These are the void serpents of Kepler 442b. They can survive in the vacuum of space itself and have been known to attack mining stations by wrapping around them and crushing the hull. How is that possible? Another student called out. Nothing can live in space without protection. The professor nodded gravely. That is what we thought until we encountered these creatures. They have evolved in an environment so hostile that the vacuum of space is actually comfortable for them. Their bodies can withstand temperature, extremes that would kill most life forms instantly. They feed on cosmic radiation and hunt by detecting the heat signatures of spacecraft. The lecture continued with more examples of impossible creatures from worlds that seemed designed to create the perfect killers. The students listened with growing unease as each new example seemed more terrifying than the last. Jin took careful notes throughout, writing in neat, precise handwriting that somehow looked different from the flowing scripts used by most alien species. Now we come to the most dangerous world known to our civilization, the professor said, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. The hologram changed to show a blue and green planet covered in swirling white clouds. Looked almost peaceful compared to the barren Deathworlds they had been studying, but something about it made the students feel uneasy. This world is called Earth by its inhabitants. Though our records listed as Deathworld Prime, the professor paused. Letting the name sink in, it is a planet so hostile that our bravest explorers refuse to set foot on its surface. The very air burns the lungs of most species. The gravity is crushing by civilized standards. Massive storms rage across the continents for months at a time, and the creatures that live there hunt each other in endless cycles of violence. A green-skinned student from Thraxia Prime raised his arm. Professor, surely no intelligent life could evolve in such conditions. That is where you would be wrong, Cadet Veltar, the professor replied. Intelligence makes the creatures of Deathworld Prime more dangerous, not less. They are called humans, and they represent everything we fear about predator evolution taken to its logical extreme. The hologram showed theoretical reconstructions of human anatomy since no live specimens had ever been captured. Jin watched with interest as the display highlighted features that his classmates found horrifying. Notice the forward-facing eyes. The professor pointed out, this indicates a pure predator species that has evolved to track and kill other creatures. The muscle density is nearly twice that of most civilized species, allowing for explosive bursts of speed and strength. Their bones are incredibly dense, making them difficult to injure seriously. But most terrifying of all, the professor continued, humans possess something called adrenaline. When threatened or excited, this chemical floods their system, making them stronger, faster, and more resistant to pain. They become more dangerous when injured, not less. This goes against everything we understand about natural survival instincts. Jin continued taking notes, his pen moving smoothly across the paper around him. Students were becoming visibly distressed. Some had changed color, indicating fear responses. Others were making unconscious defensive gestures. The professor was just getting started. They have redundant organs, meaning they can survive injuries that would kill most species instantly. They can function on minimal sleep for extended periods. They form what they call pack bonds, not just with their own species, but with other creatures entirely, including predators that they keep as companions. Pack bonds with predators, a student whispered. That is impossible. Not for humans, the professor replied. They will fight to the death for creatures they have adopted into their social groups. This makes them unpredictable, because you cannot determine their behavior based on normal survival instincts. They might sacrifice themselves to save a creature from an entirely different world. The lecture continued for another hour, with Professor Cale Thomas describing theoretical human capabilities in detail that made his students increasingly uncomfortable. Their ability to survive extreme temperatures, their resistance to toxins and diseases, their capacity to heal from wounds that would permanently disable other species, their habit of forming emotional attachments to dangerous predators. listened to every word while maintaining his calm exterior when other students gasped at particularly disturbing details. He showed only academic interest when they whispered fears about ever encountering such creatures. He continued writing notes. As if studying any other subject. Finally, the lecture ended and students began filing out of the hall, most of them talking nervously about what they had learned. Jin packed his materials slowly and methodically, waiting for the crowds to thin before making his way toward the exit. As he walked through the corridor, he overheard two crystalline beings discussing the lecture in worried tones. "Thank the stars, we will never encounter one of these humans in real combat," one said, its voice creating musical tones that indicated extreme anxiety. "Can you imagine facing something that becomes more dangerous when you hurt it?" The professor said they were quarantined on their world for good reason, the other replied. "The Galactic Council made sure of that centuries ago. No Deathworld creature has ever left that system." Jin paused at the doorway, looking back at the lecture hall where the holographic display still showed theoretical images of his home world. For just a moment, something flickered in his brown eyes, something that might have been homesickness or perhaps quiet amusement at the irony of the situation. The expression was gone, and he continued walking toward his dormitory. Like any other ordinary student from any other ordinary world, his footsteps made no sound on the marble floor, and his movement had the unconscious efficiency of someone who had learned to walk quietly as a matter of survival. That night, Jin sat by his window, looking up at the unfamiliar constellations that filled the alien sky. His fingers traced patterns on the glass, and anyone watching closely might have noticed that his movements had the precision of someone trained in combat techniques. But his roommates slept soundly in their beds, trusting completely in the safety of their academic environment. They had no idea that the most dangerous predator in known space shared their living quarters. And 3 weeks had passed since Professor Cale Thomas lectured about the terrifying creatures from Deathworld. Prime and the Academy had settled back into its normal routine of classes, training exercises, and theoretical combat simulations. Students from dozens of worlds continued their studies, learning about galactic military tactics, alien biology, and the dangerous creatures that lurked beyond civilized space. Jin maintained his quiet presence among them, attending every class, taking detailed notes, and participating just enough to avoid drawing attention. His performance was always adequate, never exceptional enough to stand out, but never poor enough to cause concern. His instructors noted his consistent work ethic, but found nothing remarkable about the ordinary-looking student from what they assumed was one of the peaceful garden worlds. The announcement came during the morning meal period, when Commander Vrexan stepped onto the raised platform in the great dining hall. His massive Thorlian frame commanded immediate attention from the 1,000 students scattered across the vast room. His thick armor plating gleamed under the artificial lighting, and his 4 arms gestured for attention. "All cadets," he announced, in a voice that needed no amplification, "the Academy will conduct its annual survival exercise beginning tomorrow morning." Chatter erupted throughout the hall as students discussed the upcoming test. Cathera was known throughout the Academy as a moderately dangerous testing ground. The moon had thin atmosphere that required breathing apparatus for most species' temperature. Swings ranged from scorching heat during the day to freezing cold at night, and the native wildlife included several species of predators that the Academy used to test student reactions under genuine stress. "The teams will be mixed species groups," Commander Vrexan continued. "This is designed to test your ability to work with beings whose biology and thought processes differ significantly from your own. Team assignments will be posted this evening. Prepare your equipment carefully because supply drops will be limited." That evening, Jin found himself assigned to Team 7, along with 4 other students who represented very different evolutionary paths. Hannah was an excellent engineer whose 4 arms were equipped with built-in tools and whose mechanical voice spoke through translation circuits. Tay came from the warrior culture of Koroth Prime, his heavily armored carapace designed for combat and his mandibles clicking when he spoke. Su belonged to the psychic Mindari species, her large dark eyes seeming to look through people rather than at them, and Yoon was an aquatic Peleron who required a portable water environment and communicated through bubbles and electronic translation. The team gathered in the preparation room to introduce themselves and plan their strategy for the upcoming challenges. Each member tried to assess the capabilities of their teammates, while explaining their own strengths and weaknesses. I have received combat training from the Koroth military Academy's Tay announced, his thick carapace, gleaming as he moved. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to leadership roles. I will guide this team to victory through superior tactical planning. Hannah flexed her 4 arms, each one equipped with different tools and sensors. My people originally helped engineer the environmental systems on many Academy testing worlds, she said through her mechanical translator. Spoke softly, her psychic abilities allowing her to sense the emotional states of her teammates. I can detect hostile intentions from native creatures before they attack us, she explained. We will not be taken by surprise if dangerous wildlife approaches. Our position, Yoon communicated through his translation device, while bubbles streamed from his breathing. Apparatus medical support will be essential for survival scenarios, he said. I have prepared treatments for every possible injury that might occur during wilderness survival. All eyes turned to Jin, who had remained quiet during the introductions. He looked around at his teammates, noting their obvious capabilities and specialized evolutionary advantages. Each of them brought clear strengths. To the group, while he appeared to offer nothing remarkably, "We'll do whatever the team needs," he said, simply. Mandibles clicked with what might have been dismissive amusement. "What special abilities do you bring from your world?" he asked. "Are you perhaps a technical specialist? Or do you have unusual sensory capabilities, basic survival training?" Jin replied quietly, "Nothing particularly impressive compared to your obvious skills." The other team members exchanged glances that suggested they were already calculating how to compensate for what appeared to be their weakest member. Hannah Mechanical Systems word as she processed this information. Tay armor plating shifted as he reconsidered his tactical assessments. Su's psychic senses probed gently at Jin's mind, but found only calm confidence that seemed oddly out of place. The transport ship carried all Academy teams to Cathara Moon. Through a journey that took most of the day, students spent the time reviewing their equipment, checking their breathing apparatus, and discussing strategy with their teammates. The moon grew larger in the viewports, showing a harsh landscape of rocky canyons, deep caves, and sparse vegetation that looked barely capable of supporting life. The moment their dropship departed, Team 7 faced the full hostility of Cathara. Environment howling winds cut through their protective gear despite its advanced design. The thin atmosphere made every breath a conscious effort, even with breathing assistance. The temperature was already dropping as the moon-day cycle shifted toward the brutal cold of night. The first challenge appeared immediately before them, were nearly vertical, and the bottom disappeared into darkness far below. Other teams could be seen in the distance, struggling with similar obstacles, while the engineering problem, some attempted to construct bridges using their survival equipment. Others tried to find alternative routes around the canyon. Studied the canyon for about 30 seconds, then began removing rope from his pack. His movements were efficient and confident as he examined the anchor points available on both sides of the gap. His teammates watched with growing interest as he began tying knots that none of them recognized despite their diverse backgrounds. "Where did you learn rope work like that?" "Survival manual basic training," Jin replied, while continuing his work. His hands moved with practiced precision, creating anchor systems that would have taken experienced engineers much longer to devise within minutes. He had established a crossing system that allowed the entire team to traverse the canyon safely. Other teams were still debating their approaches when Team 7 of the moon native creatures for food. The Catharan sandstalkers were lizard-like predators known for their speed, camouflage abilities, and aggressive territorial behavior. Most Academy teams considered themselves fortunate to catch one after hours of careful planning and coordinated effort. Jin volunteered to join the hunting party, along with Tay, who assumed his warrior training would be essential for dealing with dangerous prey. They moved away from the camp while the others prepared cooking equipment and established a secure perimeter. 20 minutes later, Jin returned, dragging a sand to be improvised weapons, though the precision of the kill suggested far more skill than basic survival training. "Should provide incredible luck," Tay muttered, but his tone suggested growing suspicion rather than admiration, beginning to detect something unusual about his seemingly ordinary teammate that night. Team 7 rested in their shelter, while other teams continued struggling with basic survival challenges. Their success had been almost effortless compared to The difficulties other groups were experiencing, several instructors had noted their performance with interest, though none yet suspected the true reason for their efficiency. The emergency distress call came during the darkest part of the night. When most teams were trying to sleep, Team 3 had encountered something that was not supposed to be part of the exercise. A pack of Kitharan night prowlers had surrounded their camp, and the massive predators were preparing to attack night prowlers. Where apex predators, that academy instructors, usually prevented students from encountering the creatures, stood nearly 3 meters tall, with crystalline claws that could cut through academy armor. Their pack coordination was flawless, and they had been known to kill trained soldiers in previous incidents. "We should signal for emergency extraction," Yoon said, his bubbles streaming rapidly in distress. "Night prowlers have killed experienced military personnel. The academy will not send help unless someone is actually dying," Sue added, her psychic senses detecting the creature's bloodthirsty intentions from kilometers away. "Team 3 will not survive until morning without assistance." The emergency extraction shuttle arrived at dawn, called in by Team 3 automated distress beacon. Academy instructors expected to find student casualties and traumatized survivors, requiring immediate medical attention. Instead, they discovered 5 dead night prowlers arranged in a perfect line, killed with precision that suggested professional military training far beyond. Academy-level Commander Vrex examined the creatures with growing confusion. His experience included decades of combat against various galactic threats, but the damage patterns on these apex predators made no sense according to his understanding of available weapons and tactics. "These were not killed by standard equipment," he announced to the gathered teams. "Something used bare hands to sever spinal columns and crush vital organs. What manner of creature could accomplish this level of destruction?" Team 7 exchanged nervous glances, while Jin maintained his calm demeanor. The other students whispered among themselves, creating theories that ranged from secret academy experiments to rogue military units testing new combat enhancement techniques. "Perhaps one of the students has been concealing advanced surgical modifications," suggested Dr. Yelsero. The Academy xenobiology expert, "Some worlds permit dangerous biological enhancements that might explain these capabilities." Commander Vrex shook his massive head, sending ripples through his thick armor plating. "I have seen enhanced soldiers fight in multiple conflicts," he said. "This is something entirely different. The biomechanics required for this kind of damage suggest a creature with natural weapon integration and reflexes that exceed our current scientific understanding." The return journey to the academy passed in uncomfortable silence. Team 7 members avoided looking directly at Jin, while he continued reading his study materials as if nothing unusual had occurred. Sue remained unconscious, requiring medical attention. That Dr. Yelsero could not fully explain her psychic abilities, seemed to have been overwhelmed by contact with something her mind was not equipped to process back. At the academy, Jin found himself under subtle surveillance. His instructors began paying closer attention to his performance in classes. His dormitory room was inspected more frequently by maintenance staff, and security cameras tracked his movements through corridors with greater precision. His teammates' behavior around him changed dramatically. Hannah no longer made casual conversation during study sessions, her mechanical systems seeming to malfunction whenever Jin was present. Tae kept his weapons within easy reach whenever they shared common areas, his warrior instincts unable to relax. Around something his body recognized as a superior predator, Sue avoided being alone with Jin entirely once she recovered consciousness. Her psychic sensitivity made proximity to a human mind too overwhelming to endure the brief contact with his unshielded thoughts had shown her memories and instincts that belonged to something far more alien than his appearance. Suggested Don Liyun seemed to maintain normal interaction, though his medical training had led him to observe Jin with scientific curiosity rather than fear. During a routine physical examination that all returning students underwent, he made several discoveries that should have been impossible to miss. During Jin Academy admission, screening your bone density is nearly twice the galactic average, Yoon observed, reviewing his scanner readings with professional fascination. Your muscle fiber composition suggests explosive strength capabilities, and your cardiovascular system is designed for sustained high-performance activity. How did previous medical examinations miss these biological anomalies? Considered his response carefully. The medical data was becoming harder to conceal as academy testing grew more sophisticated. Perhaps previous examiners were not as thorough. "As you are," he replied, "there is more," Yoon continued, his excitement overriding his caution. "Your neural activity patterns are unlike anything in our medical databases. Your brain appears to process multiple threat assessments simultaneously while maintaining conscious control over normally automatic responses. This suggests evolutionary development in an environment requiring constant vigilance against multiple predator species." The conversation was interrupted by an academy-wide announcement. Professor Cale Thomas' voice echoed through every corridor and classroom, demanding immediate attention from all students and staff. "Emergency assembly in the Great Hall," he announced. "All cadets report immediately for mandatory attendance in the Great Hall." Professor Cale Thomas stood before a new holographic display showing detailed scans of the dead. Night prowlers, his 6 eyes reflected deep concern as he addressed the assembled crowd of nervous students and worried instructors. "The killings on Cathara represent an unprecedented event," he began gravely. "Something demonstrated capabilities that exceed our understanding of natural biological limits. The precision of these attacks suggests not just advanced training, but evolutionary adaptation, specifically designed for efficient termination of apex predators." The professor paused, dramatically scanning the crowd of increasingly frightened students. This has forced academy leadership to consider a disturbing possibility. For the first time in centuries, we must ask ourselves whether one of the legendary Deathworld beasts has somehow infiltrated our institution. Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembly. Students instinctively moved closer to their own species groups, seeking comfort in familiar biology while casting suspicious glances at anyone who looked different from themselves. The diversity that normally characterized academy life suddenly seemed threatening rather than educational. Therefore, Professor Cale Thomas continued, "All students will undergo enhanced biological screening. Any anomalies will be investigated thoroughly. We will discover what manner of creature walks among us, and we will determine whether it represents a threat to galactic security." The announcement created immediate chaos. Students shouted questions and demanded immediate answers. Many wanted to know why they had not been warned about potential dangers. Others questioned how academy security could have failed so completely. That classes should be suspended until the threat was identified, and Kantanjan sat perfectly still as panic erupted around him, his expression remaining calm while his mind calculated rapidly the time for concealment was ending, and soon he would face choices that would determine not just his own fate, but potentially the relationship between humanity and the galaxy that believed it had successfully quarantined the most dangerous species in known space security forces, began moving through the crowd, taking detailed scans of every student present. Their equipment was designed to detect genetic anomalies, unusual bone density, and metabolic irregularities that might indicate Deathworld origins. The screening process would be thorough and systematic, leaving no possibility for concealment. Enhanced biological scanners would reveal Jin human physiology within hours. His cover story would collapse under detailed examination by equipment specifically designed to detect creatures exactly like him. The Academy had unknowingly created the perfect trap for a species they feared above all others. As students filed out of the Great Hall to begin the screening process, Jin remained seated, watching the crowd disperse. His teammates glanced back at him nervously, but none approached to ask if he needed assistance. They had already begun the psychological process of distancing themselves from someone they suspected might be far more dangerous than his appearance, suggested Professor Cale Thomas noticed Jin's stillness and approached his position in the back of the hall. "Is there something troubling you about the screening process, cadet?" he asked, his 6 eyes studying the human with new interest. Jin looked up at the professor, who had spent so much time lecturing about the theoretical capabilities of Deathworld beasts, without knowing that one of those creatures had been taking detailed notes throughout every class. "Not at all, Professor," he replied calmly. "I am simply curious to learn what the screening will reveal about all of you." Something in his tone made Professor Cale Thomas pause. His academic instincts detected layers of meaning that seemed oddly sophisticated for a student. From what records indicated was a peaceful garden world, but before he could pursue the conversation further, Jin stood and walked toward the exit, leaving the professor with questions he could not yet articulate. The enhanced screening would begin in the morning, and Jin knew that his time As an anonymous student was measured in hours rather than days, soon the Academy would discover that their worst fears about Deathworld, infiltration, were not only justified but had been reality for longer than anyone imagined possible. The enhanced biological screenings began at dawn with Academy medical staff working in shifts to process hundreds of students through advanced scanning equipment. The machines were designed to detect genetic anomalies, unusual bone density, metabolic irregularities, and any other biological markers that might indicate Deathworld origins. Jin watched the proceedings with growing tension from his position in the waiting area. His human physiology would not survive detailed examination by equipment specifically created to identify creatures exactly like him. The scanners would reveal bone density nearly twice the galactic average, muscle fiber composition designed for explosive strength, and cardiovascular systems adapted for sustained high performance activity. Academy security had been quietly increased, with armed guards positioned at all exits and patrol ships. Monitoring the surrounding space, Commander Vrex An personally supervised the screening process, his experience with dangerous creatures making him the obvious choice to identify potential threats. The screening procedure was thorough and systematic. Each student submitted to full-body scans, genetic analysis, and metabolic testing that revealed everything about their biological capabilities. Students from peaceful worlds showed predictable results, while those from more challenging environments displayed the expected adaptations for their native conditions. Commander Vrexan interviewed students who had been present during the Night Prowler incident, seeking additional details that might help identify the mysterious creature responsible for the killings. Team 3 provided detailed accounts of their rescue, describing their unknown savior with growing recognition that something far beyond normal capabilities had intervened. The creature showed no fear, reported Cadet Tormak, his green skin still pale from trauma. It approached 5 apex predators as if they were harmless domestic animals when they attacked. It moved like liquid shadow, killing each one with single precise strikes. Team 7 was called for separate interviews under more intensive questioning. Commander Rex An sensed that they knew more than their initial reports suggested under pressure. Hannah's mechanical voice began to stutter as she struggled with conflicting loyalties between Team Solidarity and Academy duty. Her responses became increasingly evasive as she tried to avoid revealing information that might implicate Jin while still providing enough cooperation to satisfy the investigators. Tay maintained military discipline, but his answers grew shorter and more guarded with each question. Refused to participate entirely, claiming that psychic contact with the memory was too traumatic for her mental health. The brief exposure to Jin's unshielded mind during the Night Prowler encounter had left her with nightmares and waking visions that her species' medical experts could not explain. Only Yoon provided detailed cooperation. Though his medical fascination seemed to override his fear, the efficiency was remarkable, he told the investigators. Each strike targeted precisely the correct location to cause immediate incapacitation. This suggests not just extensive training, but instinctive knowledge of alien anatomy that would require decades of study to acquire. During his own interview, Jin maintained his cover story with careful precision. He presented himself as a frightened student who had hidden during the attack and observed nothing useful. His vital signs remained steady throughout the intensive questioning, a feat that required conscious control over autonomic responses that most species could not achieve. However, Dr. Yelsera noticed something disturbing. In Jin biological readings, his stress hormones remained at baseline levels, despite the intense interrogation, suggesting either complete truthfulness or an ability to consciously regulate fear responses that should be impossible for most sapient species. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Academy maintenance staff discovered that Jin dormitory room showed unusual wear patterns. The reinforced floor plates designed to support multi-ton alien students displayed stress fractures near his sleeping area, suggesting that something significantly heavier than his apparent body weight had been moving through that space. More disturbing still, acoustic sensors revealed that Jin's sleep patterns were unlike those of any known species. Instead of the deep unconsciousness that left most creatures vulnerable, his brain activity suggested a state of controlled rest that maintained constant environmental awareness. This was the sleep pattern of a creature evolved in an environment where predators might attack at any moment. The most damning evidence came from Academy Central Computer Systems. A routine security review revealed that Jin had been accessing databases containing detailed information about galactic military capabilities, fleet compositions, and defense installations. His queries had been subtle and spread across months of activity, but the pattern suggested systematic intelligence gathering rather than academic curiosity. Professor Cale Thomas called an emergency meeting of senior academy staff in a secure conference room. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling, pointing to one terrifying conclusion. A creature from Deathworld Prime had been living among them for months, learning their weaknesses and studying galactic civilization from within. We must proceed carefully, Commander. Vrexen advised his combat experience, making him cautious about direct confrontation. If this truly is a Deathworld beast, then aggressive action could result in massive casualties. We need to isolate the creature and determine its intentions before taking any hostile measures. The Ariel Serral reviewed the biological data with growing horror. The capabilities described in our theoretical models may have been conservative estimates. She said, if this creature represents typical Deathworld physiology, then our understanding of dangerous biology has been fundamentally inadequate. The decision was made to conduct a surprise inspection of Jin quarters while he attended his regular classes. The search team would look for additional evidence of Deathworld origins, while Jin was safely contained in a classroom. Surrounded by other students and instructors, what they discovered in his dormitory room exceeded their worst expectations. Hidden beneath seemingly innocent personal belongings, they found communications equipment that predated Jin's arrival at the Academy star charts, showed detailed knowledge of galactic military installations that should not have been accessible to civilian students. Most shocking of all, they discovered records indicating that Jin was not the first human to attend the Academy. He was merely the most recent in a long line of infiltrators who had been systematically studying galactic civilization. For decades, Professor Cale Thomas examined the evidence with growing alarm. These documents suggest coordinated intelligence gathering across multiple worlds and institutions. He said, the Deathworld creatures have not been randomly escaping there. Supposed quarantine, they have been deliberately and systematically studying Usta. Communications equipment suddenly activated without warning, displaying a message in perfect galactic standard. The text was simple but terrifying in its implications. We know you have discovered Jin. It is time for formal contact across the Academy. Jin received the same message on his personal communication device. He stood calmly in the middle of his xenobiology class while alarms began sounding throughout the facility. His classmates looked around in confusion, but Jin understood exactly what was happening. The time for concealment had ended. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had been among them far longer than anyone had imagined, and that the most feared species in known space had been patiently preparing for this moment of revelation. Security forces surrounded the classroom, their weapons designed for containing the most dangerous specimens in the galaxy. Commander Vrexan entered with a full tactical team, their equipment specifically chosen for dealing with creatures that became more dangerous when threatened. We know what you are, the commander announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with deadly situations. Surrender peacefully, and you will not be harmed. Jin looked around at the armed soldiers, calculating their capabilities and weaknesses with unconscious efficiency. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He smiled with genuine warmth rather than the cold expression they expected from a Deathworld predator. You misunderstand the situation, he said quietly. I am not trapped in here with you. You are trapped in here with me, but violence will not be necessary. My people sent me here to learn, not to conquer. The statement carried implications that would reshape everything the galaxy believed about the creatures they had tried so desperately to contain on their distant, impossible world. Jin reached slowly into his pocket, while dozens of weapons remained trained on his position. The security team tensed, expecting him to produce some kind of Deathworld weapon that would turn the classroom into a battlefield. Instead, he withdrew a small device that projected a holographic message above his palm. The hologram showed what appeared to be a human military commander standing in what looked like a sophisticated command center. The figure wore no armor or weapons, but carried an authority that made even Commander Vrex and unconsciously straighten to attention. Greetings to the Galactic Council and the institutions of learning that have unknowingly hosted our observers, the holographic commander said in calm, measured tones. His voice somehow made his words more threatening than any battle cry. We are humanity, the species you have attempted to quarantine on the world you call Deathworld Prime. The classroom fell silent as the implications of this statement sank in. Students, who had been whispering nervously now, stared in shock at their classmate who had been sitting among them for months, Professor Kale. Thomas' eyes widened as he realized that his theoretical lectures about Deathworld beasts had been attended by one of the creatures he had been describing. We wish to inform you that your quarantine has been ineffective for approximately 200 of your standard years, the hologram continued. The human commander expression remained neutral, but his words carried the weight of revelation that would reshape galactic understanding. We have been present throughout your civilization, learning your technologies, understanding your capabilities, and preparing for the day when formal contact would become necessary. Commander Rex Ann found his voice first, his military training overriding his shock. What do you want from us? He demanded the holographic. Commander seemed to look directly at him. Despite being a recorded message, we want what any intelligent species desires: recognition as equals trade opportunities, cultural exchange, and the chance to contribute to galactic civilization as partners, rather than as the monsters you have imagined us to be. Jin stepped forward, causing the security team to tense nervously, but he made no aggressive moves. My mission was to evaluate whether peaceful coexistence was possible, he said. Based on my observations over these months, I believe it is you fear us, because you do not understand us, but fear can be overcome through knowledge and mutual respect. Professor Kale Thomas struggled to process what he was hearing. Your species was quarantined because preliminary studies indicated you were too dangerous for contact with civilized worlds, he said. The decision was made without consulting us, Jin replied. The evaluation was based on our biology rather than our intentions. You judged us as monsters because we evolved on a world that demanded physical capabilities you found frightening, but you never tried to understand our culture, our values, or our desire for peaceful cooperation. The Academy communication systems suddenly came alive with incoming messages from across the galaxy. Human agents on dozens of worlds were simultaneously revealing themselves to local authorities. Each carried the same message of desired peaceful contact and willingness to participate in galactic civilization as equals rather than as hidden infiltrators. Commander Rex Ann stared at the flood of incoming reports. With growing amazement, how many of you are there among us? He asked. Jin's smile became genuinely warm, enough to have learned that despite our reputation as Deathworld beasts, we have more in common with galactic civilization than anyone suspected. We are social creatures who form bonds across species lines. We are curious about other forms of life. We want to explore the stars together. Rather than remain isolated on our world, Dr. Yel Sira approached cautiously, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. But your physical capabilities, the strength, the reflexes, the resistance to injury, how can we trust creatures with such advantages not to use them against us? Because Jin replied gently, those same capabilities have been protecting you. Without your knowledge, human agents have been quietly preventing disasters, resolving conflicts, and eliminating threats that would have caused massive casualties. We have been guardians, rather than predators. He gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed images of various incidents across galactic space pirates eliminated before they could attack civilian transports. Natural disasters where mysterious helpers appeared to assist rescue efforts, dangerous criminals who vanished before they could commit planned atrocities. We could have conquered your civilization centuries ago if that had been our intention, Jin continued. Instead, we chose to learn about you, to understand your cultures, and to prepare for the day when we could reveal ourselves as potential allies rather than as the enemies you expected. The holographic commander spoke again, as if responding to the questions being raised in the classroom. Humanity requests formal diplomatic recognition from the Galactic Council. We offer our capabilities in service of peace and mutual protection rather than conquest. We have technologies and perspectives that could benefit all species while learning from the wisdom and knowledge that galactic civilization has accumulated. Dune surfaced from his portable water tank bubbles, streaming rapidly as he processed the revelation. What assurances can you provide that your people will not use their advantages to dominate other species? He asked. Jin's expression became serious as he considered the question. The same assurance that any species provides that our actions will be judged by their results rather than by fears based on our appearance or capabilities. We have spent 2 centuries proving our peaceful intentions through our behavior. Do our actions during that time suggest conquest or cooperation? Professor Kale, Thomas realized that everything he had taught about Deathworld beasts would need to be completely reconsidered. Your presence here at the Academy, he said, what was the real purpose to learn about galactic military doctrine and capabilities? Jin admitted, but not for conquest, for protection. We wanted to understand how to defend ourselves and our potential allies if diplomacy failed. We hoped it would not be necessary, but we prepared for the possibility that fear might lead to conflict. Commander Vrexan lowered his weapon slightly. His military instincts recognizing honesty when he heard it. You could have killed everyone in this room, he observed. Jin replied simply, but why would we want to? You are not our enemies. You are potential friends, teachers, and partners in exploring the galaxy. We came here to build bridges, not to burn them. The communication system chimed. With an incoming priority message from the Galactic Council, the emergency session had been called to address the revelation that humanity existed throughout galactic space and was requesting formal diplomatic recognitions. Looked around the classroom at faces that showed fear, curiosity, and growing understanding. The age of humanity hidden observation was ending. The age of open cooperation between Deathworld survivors and the civilization they hoped to join as equals was about to begin. The choice now belonged to the galaxy, whether they would respond with the fear that had created the original quarantine, or with the wisdom to recognize that their most dangerous neighbors had spent centuries proving they wanted to be friends. Rather than conquerors, waited patiently for their decision, knowing that the future of human galactic relations would be determined by how the species that had once feared them chose to respond to an offer of partnership from the creatures they had believed were monsters.